from this presentation on the screen.io. So the request that we got from Kai was to look 3 or 4 years in the future of where these technologies were going. VRM as both an idea and a business model and a platform, we've been thinking about the future for probably the last 10 years. My name is Bohan. I'm from New York. I'm told I talk too fast, so I'm going to slow down a little bit for this presentation. But I've been working for the last 20 years on internet-type projects, whether it's building user experiences for brands like JetBlue or General Motors, to spending the last 2 years at Mozilla working on strategy and what the future of both user agency and the future of publishing looks like. About 10 years ago, I was invited up to Harvard for one of the early meetings of Project VRM, which is Doc Searls, who spoke this morning, his fellowship project at the Harvard Berkman Center. It is a community, and like any good community, we fight and argue, and we high-five, and we share each other's ideas. It's also a movement, and it's folks who see the way the marketplace works right now needs to change. Not just because we can, but because it's just obviously not working. Parts of it will stay. You know, I've joked with folks that VRM is that 20% to 50% solution. We're going to fix huge problems, and the rest we can't fix, and it'll keep going. But it's also a lot of action, and it's around a really simple idea. Free customers are more valuable than captives. The way the current marketplace works just in general, if you're building a company, whether it's selling cars or selling a service or selling software, you want to capture customers. We call them targets. We talk about moats and castles and silos and how we keep them, and we keep them in our value chain, and we talk about a funnel and how we move a human being from, you know, consideration down to purchase, which kind of sounds like the digestive system, which is a pretty awful metaphor, but it's a business metaphor that a lot of folks use. And so VRM stands for Vendor Relationship Management. And the idea is that it's the reciprocal of CRM, which is Customer Relationship Management. Dell Computers spends billions of dollars every year on a CRM system that knows every 18 months they should let me know that it's time for me to buy a new computer. Unfortunately, they've been doing that every 18 months for the last 10 years. And 10 years ago, I switched to Apple, and I haven't looked back. So they're kind of losing money every time they use the CRM system, but the belief is someday they'll get me back into the funnel. The idea of VRM is how does the user take control? Not be given control, but how does the user step up and say, here's what I'm actually willing to accept. Here are the terms that I want to work with your company on. It's a user standing up for themselves and saying, here is how I want the marketplace to treat me, not, you know, treat me slightly better by not sending me an email every 3 days, send it every 5 days. VRM is about independence and engagement. It's not about opting out of the marketplace. It's about changing the terms of engagement between you and the companies that you work with. So Daniel Kaplan made a great point in his keynote yesterday about solving market problems. And he said, when are we going to see the demand side actually driving how a marketplace works? Right now, we've got the supply side. You can have any color of Ford motor car you want as long as it's black, which was Henry Ford's, you know, classic quote. When are we going to see that demand side where the user says, this is what I actually want, and the marketplace responds to it? When we talk about what are the parts of VRM, and you know, Kai said, what's the future of VRM look like? The future of VRM in the next couple of years is we're going to have a slide deck like Justin or Marcus put up here talking about the technologies that are actually being put together to make this happen. There is no one protocol that's VRM. It's going to be a collection of things, and they cover things like identity, personal clouds, consent receipts. But it's all about personal data and user control, and that's critical to this. It's the user actually having control. And so there are lots of things right now that are VRM-ish. Uber is an example of something that's kind of VRM-ish. A user says, hey, I want a cab. I want a taxi in Helsinki at the Culture Center, and I want to go to the airport. That's a user sending a signal. That's intent casting, which is what VRM is all about. Unfortunately, Uber is the silo that you reach into and say, here's what I want, and send your signal, and only Uber drivers are able to respond. That's VRM-ish. We want to see a world where you can say to a marketplace, I want a cab, and drivers from Lyft and drivers from Uber and drivers from Get can all come back and say, hey, here's my offer. Let me see your RFP. Let me respond to it. And also when we talk about control, it's critical. So in the sense of, I'm thinking of buying a car, I don't need to give Ford Motor Company my name, address, and phone number if I'm thinking of buying a car. And that's what Ford wants. Ford wants to get me into their CRM system and use my data almost against me. We see VRM as being a moment where you can send a personal RFP, send a signal, send this intention to a company and say, hey, I want X. And that might be a car or a vacation or just your shopping list for this weekend, but you don't have to give them any more data than here's what I'm actually looking to get or buy or the service that I want from you. Build a relationship with me. I'll be willing to tell my local grocery store what my address is for a delivery, but not before I bought anything from them, before I actually have something to work with. And so one of the ways I describe VRM to folks, particularly in the corporate world, who see human beings as targets, unfortunately, is VRM gives the user scale. This idea that I can now, if Dell has always-on infrastructure that is processing data constantly to reach me and the other Seans that are out there, VRM gives me the scale where I can actually say to a Ford Motor Company or a Dell or even my local grocery store, here's who I am and here's what I want. Treat me on an even playing field. It's a scary proposition for a lot of companies. They live in a world of control. They live in a world where they've never had an opportunity for a user to tell them what they really wanted outside of a bad focus group or a survey. And this idea that suddenly they'd be at the whims of their customers is frightening. That's not how it's a pretty tough proposition for a lot of old school corporate folks who don't see that there's a better way. And when we talk about intent casting, there are positive and negative signals. And I apologize for jumping around, I missed a bullet point. But there are positive and negative signals. And in the same way that I want to go on vacation and I want to go to Mexico from these dates for this price and this star hotel, that's an awesome positive signal for a company like Booking.com. But a negative signal that's also super valuable, maybe not in cash, but possibly, is, hey, I just got back from vacation. Stop showing me effing vacation ads. I don't want to see any more of these things that you're trying to sell me. Because the marketplace doesn't know when you don't want something. We'll get to, in a moment, an opportunity for the marketplace, specifically for the user, to tell a marketplace no. There are a couple of different examples, and I'm kind of flying through my presentation because I know we're running short on time, but Priceline.com is another VRM-ish example. You want to go on vacation to a certain place at a certain time for a certain price. You send this intent signal into Priceline. And Priceline then gives you back an offer. Unfortunately, there's no transparency in that model. I don't know if there was a third offer that was better for me but not better for Priceline. I'm still happy. I got the vacation I want for the most part, but I'm leaving things on the table that we think the user should have a right to be visible in. Another example is the VRM community went to a really large American retailer a few years ago and sat down with them and explained this idea of intent casting and your shoppers actually telling you what you want. And the CMO of this company turned around and said, yeah, this is a great idea, but I just spent $1 billion on a CRM system. Why would I do this? Well, part of the model of VRM is it's a natural replacement for all the bad behavior in the marketplace, but if you've already spent $1 billion on a CRM system, it's probably going to work whether VRM exists or doesn't. But VRM is able to actually give you the opportunity to reach customers who want to be treated differently. And when we talked to this CMO, we said, look, what if 10% of the customers in a given store were to give you their shopping list on Friday, a couple of days before they go into the store to buy their groceries for the week? His eyes got big as saucers. He said, that would cut out all my guesswork. He would know exactly how much milk he needed in a given week, exactly how much cat food he would need, just with 10% of his customers telling him this is what I want. Now for that, I should get something as the user. If I'm sharing this data back, maybe it's better discounts, maybe it's you treat me differently. You know, we want to see loyalty be a two-way street, not just I'm loyal to Delta and Delta treats me like crap every time I go to the airport. And the last example that I use is ad blocking. Doc called it after my softball question, which I gave him this morning, Doc called it the world's largest boycott. Actually, it's Joyce's quote, the 200 million people boycott. Ad blocking is a signal. It's a signal from the user to the marketplace that I'm done with malware being dropped on my machine and cookies and bad JavaScript or just crappy ads or being followed around the web, this entire surveillance economy that you've built. Do not track is an example from a few years ago, which, said to a marketplace, here are the things that I don't want. One of the arguments on the industrial side of the web, the really big players, the corporations who spend a ton of money on advertising, is we really can't hear what the users are saying. Well, that's bunk. They can, and the users are talking. And the idea of ad blocking being an example of VRM is perfect, because the user's actually telling advertisers and publishers, no, stop doing something. The question is, are they going to listen? And I've got an example in a few moments of a way that ad blocking could be used positively, both for the user and publishers. And another example is Customer Commons, which is a great organization. And I posted a couple of links to the screen.io. But Customer Commons is working on this idea of my terms. When you go to Facebook, you accept their terms and that's it. Or don't use it. It's very much a binary operation. In the case of my terms, one of the arguments that big players in the web have used is, well, we have no idea what the user wants. And the terms of service are written by lawyers who are looking to mitigate risk and liability. And the idea of my terms is, I want to be able to say from my browser, in the same way that do not track works, here's what I'm okay with. I'm okay with you holding data about me, but only 30 days. I'm not okay with you dropping cookies on me, but I'm okay with advertising. You can do the ads, just not the cookies. What are these 5 or 6 things? And the idea that Customer Commons is putting forward is, have that broadcast from my browser every time I go to a website. Whether they can hear it or not, we can give them an opportunity to hear it. But if they ignore it, we still track it. That user can then say at the end of the year, or with a proxy like Customer Commons or a larger organization like EFF, hey, Wired Magazine, X number of million users have told you not to hold data for 30 days. Y number of million have said stop retargeting. And that's a way for us to actually move big players. And the last thing, because of the technical horizons conversation, one of the big conversations right now in the VRM community is around the J-Link protocol for sharing data. Basically, the instance of sharing is permanently recorded in a distributed ledger. So this is a little bit of blockchain, a little bit of consent receipt. But the idea being that if I want to give a personal RFP, my intent cast to a company, hey, here's what I'm willing to buy. I shouldn't have to trade any personal information about myself when I'm sending a signal to buy. But then if that company comes back to me and says, hey, we're interested in doing business with you, okay, well, here are my terms for doing business. I'm more than willing to give you my name, address, and phone number, but you can't share it with anyone else. Or you can keep it in your CRM system, but in 30 days you have to delete it, what these things are. And then it gives you a permanent record where if anything untoward does happen, you can go back and point to it. And J-Link right now, folks inside the VRM community are playing around with it both from a use case perspective and playing around with code. And it's going to give users the ability to assert their own terms and have a permanent record of it. So when we talk about folks who are in the VRM family, 3 or 4 come to mind. A couple are here today. So Quant, CitizenMe, Digime, Miko, the Brave browser, which is Brendan Eich, formerly the CTO of Mozilla, and Internet Identity Workshop are all organizations that are either directly involved in what we're talking about with VRM or family. In the case of Brave, they're working on a browser that's privacy-centric. In the case of Quant, it's a search engine that is going to not, basically if you were to intercept Larry and Sergey in 1989 and say, hey, don't do all this stuff with Google, Quant's actually doing that. It's giving you great search results without all the surveillance. And then you have folks in the personal cloud community who are really working towards letting the user take more agency. And the last thing, for this presentation is the VRM community needs help. We're looking at the future of VRM. The next couple of years, we're going to have a deck like Justin's, hopefully without the next slide. But that's going to explain, here are the building blocks of what we're doing. Here are companies that are doing it great. The VRM mailing list is an awesome resource, and projectvrm.org has a wiki of all the startups that are actually doing things that are in this vein. And we run into folks almost on a weekly basis who are active in a VRM type model or business that didn't even know we existed. So we're looking for folks, business thinkers, software developers, corporate types who actually want to apply and implement these models.